All right. Well, thank you for joining us here this afternoon. It's always great being the kind of last one of the day. We get to bring it home. And as we're looking at this conversation, as we're coming together here post-pandemic, and recognizing that there's a lot of changes afoot out in the community, right? When we talk about this cloud first, remote first kind of world where we've got to now be more dependent on digital infrastructure and digital technology, what's that mean organizationally? And how much of these advanced things really bring back to our basic approaches? And so, I want to put the folks here in the room and into kind of a mindset of, hey, if we were to greenfield this, what would that kind of look like? And even if, unfortunately, most of the time we don't get a greenfield, right? It's a little bit more brown. What are some of those things? And so we brought together a number of folks in their own right here, each their own change agent in terms of having lived that dream of good days and bad, and are also in process here of trying to change our community for the better. And so we thought it would be good to have this panel and talk about, hey, what does digital transformation mean these days? And what kind of basics should we be using to inspire what we do? So this is intended to be informative and also a conversation. So if you have questions, please ask them. I've brought a couple. They're only going to be as good as I was able to throw together. I'm sure you have better ones. And this is meant for you. For the folks online, unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to see what questions you're asking for, but I appreciate watching, and hopefully this will be a good conversation. I'm very excited about it. So without further ado, I'm actually going to let everyone introduce themselves really quickly, because I think they're amazing, but I think you should hear from their own 2 cents. So Carson.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Carson Zimmerman. I am the M365 Security Investigations lead at Microsoft. I've been doing that for a while, been working in security operations for about 20 years now. Written or co-written a couple books on it. Please don't pay money for them, they're free and worth every penny.
Josh.
Hey everyone, Josh Jacobs. Recently retired from the Navy after 23 years. I had the opportunity to do exactly what we're going to talk about with the Navy's digital transformation, moving from an on-premise to cloud environment. I was recently hired by Ardalyst a few months ago to be a cloud solutions architect and to help drive that change through the industry.
Brian.
Yeah, good afternoon. Brian Finn. I'm the security operations practice lead at Accenture Federal. I have the distinct pleasure of working in security operations now across the military and civilian for the last 17 years. Building SOCs, helping organizations transform, so getting an understanding of their technical debt and trying to move forward. So really happy to be here today.
So if you can't tell, each one of the members here on the panel have spent a lot of time at the tactical level in terms of working through technology and some of the challenges of integration. At the strategic level, dealing with executives and mission leaders and business owners in terms of what is the right set of risks to be balancing, and then also how do we integrate that together. We had a chance to talk a little bit before this about kind of where things are going, and we got some questions here. But as I said earlier, as folks are coming into the room, if you have questions or comments and want to ask this panel we have together, please do. I don't think I would be describing it well enough if I didn't say that Carson wrote the quintessential book on security operations centers, 10 Strategies of a World-Class Cybersecurity Operations Center back in, I think, 2014.
Yes.
And now there's an update for number with 11, right? So
yes, but many of them are new.
And so, I think that kind of leads into probably our first question there, Carson. What does wild success look like in all this?
It's tough, and we have our good days and our bad days, including the cloud. I don't know if you believe that or not. And it's easy to get overwhelmed and burn out, right? Especially when you're doing incident response. Trust me, I know burnout, and all the people I know and work with, we've gotten used to what crispy looks like. Crispy, by the way, is how you feel when you've worked 9 or 10, 12 or 14 hour days in a row. And when you do this year over year, and you become increasingly aware of all of the problems around you. It's easy to get lost and feel like we're never going to get there. And what I've come to kind of understand is, I mean, you never get there. You keep going in the direction of there, but you never get there. So when you say, well, once we get done with zero trust, we're going to be there. And when we were talking about some of this, I actually, on the spur of the moment, thought of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And you're going to think, where the heck is he going with this? One of the things, and I'm no bodybuilder, but one of the things that's really inspirational about Arnold Schwarzenegger is he's always encouraging people to do just a little bit more than what they're doing today. And people are like, oh, I can't do this or that or the other thing. And he's like, don't worry about that. Just do better than what you're doing today. So for me, what wild success looks like is not an end state of having a certain set of controls to deploy. Rather, wild success is I have instilled continual improvement in my cybersecurity apparatus. And if you're doing that, for me, so many other things are secondary.
I think that's very noteworthy. So there is something of a moving target.
Exactly.
We have to hit it day by day. So Josh, I think when we look big picture here, you just went through COVID, through this pandemic, leading a team that drove probably one of the world's largest digital transformations here, with a well-known, we'll just say, bureaucratic organization, which has its own set of antibodies and challenges. What do you think wild success look like? Is it day by day? Is it the Arnold Schwarzenegger approach, or?
I think to some degree, yes. I agree with Carson, but I think there's a lot of different layers to that, right? Like, you have to be able to, especially with a small team environment, right? So wildly successful for us was having 10 people at the very beginning of that project who didn't even know how to spell cloud, me included. We come from afloat platforms, aging infrastructure, and they said, hey, roll out a Microsoft 365 environment for this entire enterprise. Well, wildly successful is being willing to be transparent enough with your peers and your team to say, hey, what is your idea? Because my idea might not be the best. Let's all work together for that solution and continually build upon what we're doing. So the Arnold Schwarzenegger approach in different terms, essentially.
All right, so building the right team. All right, Brian. I think you lived through some of these, some pretty bad days and some tough ones, and helped large organizations and small ones move forward, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the panel's kind of touched on, I'll say process and people. So if you go to technology, I guess I'll kind of go there. I think a lot of security organizations really focus on tools, and they focus on the next cybersecurity tool that's in the environment, what's on the horizon, what's coming, what do we need to put in place. They look at the SANS 20 like a roulette table, and as long as I have a chit on every number, I'm covered. And I like to change the paradigm and really start to focus on the data. So if you can get a better understanding, because you can't react to what you can't see. So really just take the time to focus in on your data, like what's being generated in your environment, what's useful, what's ingestible, what's actionable. And once you get an understanding of what that looks like, the world starts to become a little bit more clear. And you can kind of push some of the noise aside and then be able to focus effort in the future.
Wow, so that probably leads into our next question here. In terms, as we talk about data centricity, and I can't help but imagine the roulette board that we're trying to cover every chip, pulling out the MITRE ATT&CK framework and trying to make every square green, which I'm not sure what that means. What if you had just one principle to apply to your team, your first principle? What is that? People can do whatever they want as long as they
really get a fundamental understanding of the data that's being generated in the environment. Before you move out, kind of building future architectures, understand what's there. What tools do you have deployed? What are they generating? How are they configured? A lot of people, and this happens particularly in like super large organizations where you have different teams that are focusing on different aspects of security. And so they move forward and buy a particular product, you buy another product. Well, those two products don't talk to each other. In fact, they actually hate each other. How do you figure that portion out? Like, get a good understanding of what's there. Level set the expectation of what you're trying to achieve by having a better understanding of what your environment looks like. And then from there, build your plan to move forward.
So know yourself first.
Yeah.
I think that's inspirational. All right, well, let's just continue on the line here. Josh, what? I think we were talking with Dave earlier here a little bit about, we're starting up a cybersecurity operations center here. We're trying to get the bases in place. What's the first principle that he should be thinking about applying?
Well, I think one of the things you'll find is one of my big reoccurring themes is people, right? So, and the principle is invest in the people that are running your security operations center. Invest in the people that are executing the operations at the ground level. If I don't give, so my experience with that team was I had 10 sailors that were untrained. I invested in them. I empowered them. I made sure the organization didn't disempower them, and tried to provide any training and tools at their disposal that would help them get better at their job. But really what it did was prove to them that they had value and that the organization valued them, so that they bought into what we were trying to achieve. Hey, we're trying to make history and deliver a cloud capability that is more secure and more readily available globally, and it's because of you. And what we found was that those sailors that were originally complaining about working a 10-hour day were now willingly working 18 to 20 hours a day because, hey, I just want to get this one more thing done. Hey, I'm almost done. I'm going to work late tonight. Like, hey, don't forget about your families and some time off. But they were so bought in and believed in the vision and the mission because we invested in them.
Building buy-in in the organization through building that team, focusing on that set of missions, and it's amazing unlocking those potential and just probably providing some protective tissue around that so that the organization itself doesn't overwhelm it. Is that a good summary there?
That's a great summary.
All right. Carson, we've talked a lot about, I think, understanding yourself and building good people. You're going to talk about technology, right? Like it's all about technology?
I mean, I can, but people are more important than technology.
Oh, gosh. Say more.
I'm going to pile on a couple things, and I'm going to say a couple things that may shock some of you. I've come in contact with several cybersecurity organizations that spend as many dev and engineering resources on building a composite inventory as they do their SIEM. And most of you aren't probably thinking of this because it's not nearly as glamorous. Meaning, it is incumbent, in my opinion, usually on the cybersecurity apparatus to build that composite inventory. Meaning, to be clear, they're not running the change management system. They're not running each of the IT inventory systems. In fact, none of these things are the single source of truth. Your DHCP isn't, your Active Directory isn't, your Cloud Active Directory equivalent isn't, none of them are. They are together. And usually the way you fuse that signal together is highly business and enterprise dependent. So it's a matter of building that system to collect, curate, and deconflict that signal in a way that's roughly analogous to the SIEM, but diverges greatly when you get past the surface. Because that system serves as the denominator for everything you do. And if any aspect of your cybersecurity program, from prevention to detection and response, is not measured against that denominator, I guarantee you it is grossly insufficient and grossly incomplete. Every single organization I've ever come in contact with that didn't have a measured denominator had massive blind spots. And it actually fell into the you don't know what you don't know. So that denominator serves as the basis of knowing what you don't know. And this is not getting nearly the attention it deserves, frankly. And the other thing is like, if I had to do this all over again, it's not just a matter of computers anymore. You're not just counting computers. You're counting the 200 different cloud resource types that your organization is deployed, and your IoT, and your mobile, and all the other stuff that you're used to. So part of forming your denominator is not just the number of computers you have or the number of users. It's for every different type of thing. So you have to have an extensible asset inventory. And it's not just spreadsheets connected to spreadsheets. It's systems collecting data, usually daily, to provide that situational awareness.
So if I was to summarize, Carson, will we say that assets are your common denominator?
That's right.
Okay. I'm not seeing anyone throwing anything at you. So
Yet. Growth mindset.
I guess I'll buy that. Yes, sir. So can you elaborate? I'm going to repeat for everyone online here. So Carson, can you elaborate more on what you mean there by asset being a common denominator?
So let me give you an example. Let's say you are creating, you want to understand how complete you've applied a given set of security controls. Everything from MFA to antivirus and everything in between. You need that asset inventory to serve as the denominator of what percentage of completeness and coverage you have. You also need that number, frankly, when you're doing incident response. How many services and assets and users have we covered as part of this response? Like, hey, I have to revoke I'm making stuff up for a second, the 2 root certificates on everything in my enterprise. That's a bad example because usually you'd be using curls for that. Let me pick a different example. I need to remediate every copy of, I'm going to pick a random vendor, Oracle. All right. Well, if you don't have an asset inventory, you don't know the denominator to form and the coverage from which systems you need to pull the vulnerability data that constitutes where software X is deployed. And I would urge you, if anyone's like, our SCCM systems can, form the single source of truth of all of our assets. I guarantee you it doesn't. And it's not a comment about SCCM. It's the fact that you've never reached 100% management of any single thing. So you have to merge that all together.
So if I was to summarize, it sounds like that data-centric approach that Brian was talking to, pulling a pool of kind of a knowledge base of here's just what we have, right?
Exactly.
It's amazing how much we talk with folks about assets, and they always talk about the computer, not about the people or the information or the contract. And when we talk about resiliency as a whole, that's not usually part of the conversation. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an excellent point, right? So like when we took a step back and actually built a greenfield SOC in a major enterprise. And we had about 9 months to do it. And so in that time, when we were looking at the tools that we were deploying and how we were going to envision this, it was all about asset visibility. It was our ability to gain visibility on the assets. There were certain tools already deployed in there, so there was some technical debt. So then we evaluated those on, how could we incorporate the feeds off of those to generate our asset inventory? And then what delta did we have, and how could we close that delta? And once we had that asset inventory, and that was, to your point, Carson, it was extensible. We recognized that it was going to be constantly moving and that we needed to constantly update it. But once you have that kind of baseline point, it actually starts to become really, I shouldn't say easier, it's much more effective as you're building detections, incident response capabilities, and how you apply those, because you're coming from I shouldn't say a known good state, but at least you have visibility over what your state is.
So when we talk about brilliance and basics, it sounds like understanding the denominator first, right? So we're not basically dividing by 0 and causing some kind of weird cyber risk error, right? In terms of so it's by assets. All right. Well, what about NIST 800, 207? I think was zero trust architectures. I think there's an executive order. We all need to do zero trust. Josh, you've been in the middle of this conversation here, quite literally. Where does that fit into this?
We've been maneuvering in a zero trust, or attempting to maneuver in a zero trust mindset for 20 years. It's just never been called zero trust. And just because there's a fancy name to it now doesn't mean that it's any different than what we should have been doing. There's still controls and still methodologies to ensure that we are protecting our systems in a multi-tiered aspect. So just because somebody finally said, hey, let's put a name on what we are supposed to be doing, doesn't make it any less imperative that we should have been doing it all along. It's now more a matter of how do we go back and reverse engineer what we haven't been doing and do it correctly now.
All right. Brian?
I mean, I agree with everything Josh just said, but I think we have to apply zero trust in the context of the overall security architecture that we're looking for. I made that analogy of this, Sands 20 and the roulette wheel. Like, we can't get in the same paradigm with zero trust that we look at it like a roulette wheel where we just have to put a chit out there. Oh, I've put out MFA, I've done this, I've done that, I've done microsegmentation. I'm zero trust now. You have to look at it in the context of your network, enterprise environment, and how the security apparatus fits around it. And certain things are going to fit really well and should be done. And certain things are not going to fit really well. And then you can build compensating controls around that to address it. But you need to make it work for you. And if you just look at it blindly and don't come from that perspective, you can get yourself in a world of hurt quick.
Not a checklist.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a set of things we need to do and then some feedback loops to see if they're working or not working, and you get what you inspect, not what you expect.
Yep.
Huh. So Carson,
Yes.
I think during lunch we were talking a little about this, and it's always entertaining because whenever we start talking about zero trust, the first thing that usually comes up is multi-factor authentication. Never, and George, we were chatting earlier and we all kind of giggled about it because the first we started talking about was multi-factor authentication, trying to get in those things. So when we talk about, okay, hey, these 11 tenets, right, these 11 strategies here, where's zero trust fitting in there? Why not just do multi-factor authentication? And that's hard enough. Right? That's why I've heard a couple times, that is hard enough and you should be happy that we were able to do that. Is it good enough?
I think it's a piece of the puzzle, right? There's no question about it. When I think about zero trust, there's a couple things that come to mind. One of them is when you've implemented it right, it changes some of the assumptions that you can use to your advantage in terms of building the right detections, right? And some of the assumptions on the part of the analysts in the SOC in terms of what they expect to see on the systems, right? This much is fairly obvious. One of the things that often people lose track of is, you implement zero trust and there's always going to be some kind of an exception. Oh, Bob needs to get to this, and Bob really likes Linux, and we don't have zero trust integration for this Linux box over here. So we're going to give Bob an exception. And then next week, Bob got exploited. And all of the information on his computer was exfiltrated by an adversary. And then the CEO is asking, well, I thought we just did zero trust. What happened? So back to the denominator question, one of the things we want to be thinking about is tracking those exceptions and coverage for that. Because as soon as we start poking holes, the assumptions that our executives have made might or might not go out the window. So that's one of the things we want to think about.
Okay. So in terms of those basics, it sounds like when we talk about assets as a common denominator and then these exceptions are something less than good enough, we are constantly then chasing something that's never quite there.
Right.
Is that somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay. So, it's interesting, got a chance to hang out in the booth here on the floor, and, as we've kind of shifted into this cloud-first remote-driven world, seeing a lot of cloud offerings out there, right? And actually, it seems that everyone's starting to have a cloud-only offering. And, I'm going to ask maybe a question that maybe many are asked, is on-premise dead? Like, what happened to the SOC? Can't we get everyone there to show up and be in that space? Do we really have to do all this on cloud? Why can't we buy anything that's for on-premise anymore? Is it cloud only?
I have complicated feelings about this.
I imagine you do. Where are you at again?
Well, so I work for a cloud provider, for the record. I came to Microsoft 6 years ago with the mindset that the SOC needed to put all of its systems and its people inside a black hole of data. And an event horizon forms around this black hole, and all the data goes in and it never comes back out. And like they're the analysts and they're bathing in data every day. They wake up and they brush their teeth with IIS logs, and then they wrap their bodies in authentication logs, and they go to work and they ride in a car of process creation events. And life is wonderful. And that should still be the case. The issue is it can't be a black hole. And one of the reasons why I said this is that we need to have, zero trust with the rest of the enterprise. And when we think about, and that was all in the on-prem days, one of the things about the cloud is it's going to enable you to achieve so much more and so much less time. So one of the things we perceive of going to the cloud is, yes, there's risk there, but think about measuring the total risk inherited by your entire enterprise, the SOC, everything around the SOC, et cetera. And think about, where is your risk gonna be if you are moving literally 5 times faster than you could when you were on-prem, right? I've talked to organizations and I'm like, yeah, we deployed an event hub cluster on a Tuesday because we felt like it. And like just the look of shock in their eyes, like, what do you mean you did that? I'm like, it's the cloud, that's the point, right? Is I'm not worried about CapEx anymore. I'm not worried about provisioning servers. I just go. We just do it. Now, do we have some CM around it? Yeah. Do we have some guardrails around spend? Of course we do. But think about how much faster you're going to enable the SOC to move. And as a result, how much risk are you driving down as a result? So that's, when I think about, going to the cloud, I think, man, I wouldn't want to be moving at the speed that we could when we were dealing purely on-prem. On the flip side of it, every time somebody says it's dead, it doesn't matter what it is, right? What did Gartner say in 2004 when they said IPS was dead? So someone in this room probably still has an IPS device, right? Is it dead? Not completely. Is on-prem going to ever be fully dead? I doubt it. So we have to think about how are we using both of these to our advantage.
Yeah. So Josh, you just moved a fairly large organization into the cloud. Is it no holds bar and burn the ships? We're not going back.
No, not at all. So I learned a term in a solutioning call about a month or so ago called cloud appropriate. Right. So yes, we moved a really large organization into a cloud enterprise. However, it's not purely cloud, it's hybrid, right? And I think we use the term cloud appropriate because there are mission requirements, there are enterprise requirements, there are organizational requirements that force some of those SOC functions to be on-premise. Did we move some of them into the cloud? Absolutely, because they were cloud appropriate functions. But there are things that have to reside on-premise due to the nature of the enterprise's work. So I think that has to be a major consideration when you're designing your SOC to operate around what your enterprise does. What is cloud appropriate and what is not?
All right. So speed, cloud appropriate. Brian, I think I've seen one of the SOCs you build is probably one I would describe as one of the most dynamic SOCs that I've seen in practice and stood up in, I think, 9 months?
Yeah.
With that dynamicism.
Yeah, I mean, and when we did that, we actually approached it from both sides. The primary backend, it was cloud-based, but then we also had an on-premise capability to maintain security at the edge. But I think really what it comes down to is like the implementation, and I think Carson was kind of touching on this as well. The difference between tactical and strategic / operational. That the ability to do data ingest, tipping and queuing, respond to incidents, that's tactical. Long-term heuristic development, TTPs, indicators of compromise that then provide the feedback loop, strategic operational. Like, you need to be able to bring that stuff in and execute it quickly, and cloud is a great spot to do that. It's also a great spot to store on the operational side, but you have to build that feedback loop and then be able to empower it. And most of the time to empower that requires on-prem. And so, again, it kind of goes back to understanding where your architecture
Kind of full circle.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think through all that to kind of get back to where, and then you got to iterate, right? Like, no step's going to be final. Technologies evolve at a rapid pace today. New technologies are coming on the market. So you're going to have to evaluate each one in the context of how it fits in your enterprise, the data that you're trying to generate, and the outcomes you're trying to achieve.
And obviously in your role, that you may have some opinions here from insourcing and outsourcing, but as we talk about that relationship and the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you're trying to hire for that, I think we were talking earlier about how we used to really only focus on generalists in the SOC, and you had to be kind of good at a little bit of everything. Now there seems to be the trend away from the tier 1, 2 folks, really focusing on craftsman-like expertise. Where are you seeing that? How are you investing in the people to be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, where we're investing and where we would like to invest are probably two different questions, right? I think if we're kind of going back from the mindset, if we're building all this greenfield, things I'm absolutely not outsourcing is architecture. Architecture is a core competency. What your organization, your enterprise is going to have, that needs to stay in-house. Like, those people need to have an understanding what the enterprise is, how things fit into it. I'd almost go as far to say, like, I would love to say engineering sits there as well, but there's some really good reasons to outsource some of the engineering activities. Tier 1 and tier 2, if you're applying security automation and orchestration, is an area that could definitely be looked at, because today you can, generally speaking, they're the folks that have the lowest amount of skill in the environment, the least amount of experience, are still trying to learn. And it's funny how the dynamic works, because like, these are also the people that are making the most critical decision at a critical point in time in an incident. Like severity and what's actually going on. You can take a lot of that kind of learning curve out through automation. And so as you're trying to build those resources, you could potentially outsource them, but tier 3, like your actual SMEs and incident responders we would maintain those in-house as well. Like that, again, that kind of goes back to core competency. These are the folks that know your environment, know your tools, and are kind of, in an ideal world, are building out your security orchestration that are then feeding kind of the tier 1, tier 2s.
Okay. So degree of automation, degree of human intelligence, almost a augmented intelligence kind of a flow there, right, in terms of that design.
Yep.
I know we're getting close to time here, so I think I want to bring it home here on one of my favorite topics, silver bullets. Right? Usually they start out with either this is going to solve everything, or the flip side of, well, if that ever happens, game over anyway, we'll all go home. Notoriously, as an architect, you usually find that those two statements is usually the tipping and queuing that you probably have to fix that now. So, we got a couple minutes left. Want to give everyone a chance to talk about their silver bullet. Carson, you want to go first?
No.
All right. Josh, would you like to go first? We'll give Carson a second. We'll let you go last.
I need you to say that question one more time.
Certainly. So, generally, we joke a lot in this business about silver bullets, that one thing that's going to solve everything, as well as those kind of game over events that, when we're doing architecture, we go, well, hey, if they ever get on the Active Directory server over there, they earned it. It's game over. We're just going to go home after that, right? Strangely enough, when those happen, we don't go home. We get to spend a lot of time trying to fix that thing. Silver bullet wise here, as we talk about, hey, what are some of the game changers here that we're seeing that maybe we need to think about? What's your favorite silver bullet?
So my favorite silver bullet is actually something I learned from a former Microsoft employee. And it's something that I never thought I would actually adopt as something that I put into practice on a routine basis. We all do change management for systems and for software and for tools, but we've never really looked into change management for people, right? So what I learned was adoption and change management almost as a service, right? How do you change your operators' mindsets to make them want to be better and continually iterate improvements? How do you change your users' mindset and make them want to use the new technologies? Well, I don't want to use MFA because now it's an extra step. Well, did we ever give them a reason to want to use it? Do they understand it? How do we give our CIOs and CISOs a reason to want to spend a little bit more money because they don't want to assume that risk, right? So I really think, back to my reoccurring theme of people, is adoption and change management. How do we change the mindset of everyone in that enterprise, from the tier one analyst to the CIO, to make them want to make better decisions and execute better security practices in their day-to-day?
That's a pretty good silver bullet. I'm going to let Brian go next.
Well, I mean, as you gentlemen all know, my silver bullet and seminal moment were actually at the same time. And it had the same net result. So for those in the audience, I worked at incident response for a large organization that I had to take off the internet over a weekend. At the time, it was the largest private network in the world. Because an adversary had a significantly advantaged position there, and that our silver bullet to solve that problem was to take it off the internet. And the seminal moment was the adversary had gotten that position, and that we had to take it to that extent. So the learning experience that I had there was that, yeah, you can overcome anything because we put a lot of people towards that effort. We're able to eradicate that adversary and get the network back up on the weekend, and continue to move forward. And a lot of investment was made after that fact. And so the lessons I took away from that really, or that series of events and what transpired, is really kind of guiding the principles. Is when I'm building SOCs now, and when I'm looking at security, and when I'm consulting with security organizations around what they're doing, like, I live the absolute worst case scenario. So everything else from there, like, what would I have loved to have had at that time? I love the Carson's explanation of bathing in data, because I've never met a security professional that doesn't say, I want everything for as long as I can possibly have it. But there's some truth to that, right? Because with that data, you can run analytics, you can do heuristic development, you can start uncovering things that didn't exist before. But I think it's one, having the mindset that the absolute worst can't happen, being prepared to do that, and then having the realization that you can live through it.
So it's not the good days that define you.
No, it's definitely, well, I mean, the good days, you know what? I'll say this, you need to celebrate the good days, because there's going to be a bad day. And when that happens, you're going to need something to fall back on.
Fair enough. All right, so change management, good days with the bad.
I'm actually not going to be far off from either of those answers.
Gosh.
My silver bullet is pretty close, and that is post-incident response as a process. Meaning every incident you have, every high priority incident specifically, you should have a process around capturing everything that didn't go right during that incident. And I don't mean the number of systems that were unpatched. That's always be the case, though maybe that's one thing. I'm talking about everything from, analyst Sally didn't have the data that she needed, to it took me way longer to reach this many service owners than it really should have, to, the software inventory that we thought we did was totally broke. And these are not just PIRs for the SOC, they're PIRs for the entire cybersecurity apparatus. And as an extension, they may have bearing on, and in fact, there should be a process for making sure those PIRs are ultimately solved for service owners, users, business owners, et cetera. So you want to have that PIR process where you're capturing that in a place, you're tagging it, you have assigned resources to work with those organizations to follow up, and that the follow-up carries the weight of some executive that is backing this whole process. If you can do that, or something like it, your analysts feel a lot more empowered, the SOC feels like they're growing, the cybersecurity apparatus feels generally like they're working towards something, back to the very first point that you said. So if I had a silver bullet, it's doing something like that.
And in terms of that post-incident response, I imagine that you could also just do tabletops, right? And maybe exercise that even, you don't have to actually have a no kidding incident where we're having a very bad day, but exercising that incident and iterating with the team internally, externally, with the stakeholders, create those feedback loops, even without that, right? I think we might know some people that can emulate threat pretty good here, maybe help support some of those tabletops and whatnot. But it sounds like there's this, in terms of that change management and living through those good days and bad and going through and having that appropriate set of processes, especially after the fact, to learn from it.
Right on. And so PIR can plug into actual high severity incidents, blue team, or excuse me, purple team, red team, TTX, you name it.
Excellent. Okay. I think we...
About 3 minutes.
3 minutes? All right, we got 3 minutes. Anyone got the last question? Okay. You sum up in one word.
One word?
One word.
What about two? Can I do two?
Okay, I'll give you two.
Process improvement.
Process improvement.
Continual iteration.
Continual iteration.
Try harder.
Try harder. That's where we stop. Thank you, gentlemen.